Stuart Sims and Sterling Cooley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for
Thanks for
inviting
having
us.
us.
Yeah, you guys are probably the most often or had the most combined number of guest appearances on the show. Really love both you guys, and I found out from the last time when I was on with Sterling on Mark's podcast, Knocked
Knocked
Conscious,
conscious. Mhm.
that he has some things to say about you, Stuart. Like, you came up in the course of conversation. I was like, I actually know that guy and love that guy. So I figured, it'd be great to merge the streams and figure out like what we agree on, what we don't agree on. Because I mean, honestly, I think the stuff we don't agree on is some more fun stuff to talk about. So
Totally.
either one of you, who wants to start? Who wants to talk about like what they know about each other and maybe some areas of agreement, disagreement? I want to get some groundwork laid.
Yeah. So, I was on the Knocked Up or Knocked
Oh, hell
Conscious
yeah. Knocked Up
podcast.
podcast.
The Knocked Conscious podcast. I was like, well, do you guys know this guy Stuart Sims on X? He typically will have some form of disagreement with the microtubule stuff that I talk about and that Stuart Hammeroff talks about a lot. So that's kind of how I was like, you're like, oh yeah, we know Stuart. So I was like, cool, and that's how we're here today. But I'm sure people watching or whatever already know some stuff about microtubules. I'm sure it's a topic that people think about here. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've been on a number of podcasts. I'm just, there was one post that I made recently about autistic people having likely more dense microtubules in their brains. And I think, Stuart, you responded underneath it and you just said, oh, come on. Or that's how I read it. You didn't really elaborate. So I was just curious, maybe.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that about? Was it like a, come on, or was it like what I thought it was?
No, I don't remember exactly what you said, but I remember being incredulous. That's what that meant. I'm a little incredulous about it.
Okay.
But
well, can I explain the point just briefly, like a 30-second overview
explain that point you were making, and
about.
I'll respond.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the thing that I was responding to was the idea that children with spectrum autism are seemingly identifyingly having like more telepathic ability, or some, like we're talking about like the telepathy tapes or these kinds of things, or some sort of extrasensory perception that the normies don't have. And I actually met with a guy who does research in person with these types of gifted individuals. And he was telling me that these kids really do seem to have some higher ability, even though they're not capable in other areas. Like they have
deficits and gifts. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the opposite of a deficit?
Gift.
Positive a gift. I don't know. Not the ficit part they have, and then the deficit in the other area. So given my work in kind of studying consciousness and first of all, how would you explain, like, if a kid can see somebody pointing at a number across the room behind them while they're blindfolded and predictably point them out, you gotta okay, let's just assume that not everybody is trying to hoodwink us. I would assume, I'm open to the idea that could be possible, but you have to say, well, how could that be possible? It's not chance. Maybe there's a mechanism.
That's not what I was being incredulous about. I mean, me and Brent have talked about this quite a bit, actually. You're familiar with Michael Levin's work, right? With bioelectric fields.
Definitely.
Well, just real quick and dirty, in my view of these things, the human bioelectric field is a perceptual interface, just like it is for every other biological organism on Earth. And before we had linguistics, we were like every other animal in ecosystems. We communicated perceptually with this bioelectric interface. And it's what they call the sixth sense, but actually it's the first sense. Vision, hearing, olfaction, all these things are add-ons. The primary perceptual modality for all biological life forms is the bioelectric field. And we've left natural ecosystems. We've sort of, it's sort of vestigial now. We've sort of lost that ability to do it intentionally. But latent in everybody is that sort of bioelectric perceptual capacity. And, microtubules are part of the regulation and the curation and the production of the biofield for every single cell. So having denser or different shaped or different kind or more, or, some sort of something unique about autistics, that would make sense that they would have a greater capacity to utilize that biofield, especially if they have linguistic deficits, because it's really kind of linguistics that gets in the way of our ability to use that bioelectric sense. So that's why most people that are hyperverbal aren't going to have religious experiences. It's usually, I don't know if you've known many people that are like mystical, like yogis and everything. I don't know if you've ever interacted with people like that, but they get kind of goofy. And the reason they're goofy is because they're starting to utilize their Broca's area for bioelectric communication instead of linguistics. They're reverting back to that. So they seem kind of goofy to normies like us. So that's kind of my view of all that.
Oh,
He had really good connection, and then it was.
yeah. Well, that was,
Are you guys
he was on a
frozen,
roll
or?
too, man. I hate it when that
Yeah.
happens.
Hello?
Yeah, damn it.
Well, I guess we'll just hang
There's some
out
really
here.
good follow-up questions for him.
He'll be back. At least I hope.
Yeah.
This would be a weird
Absolutely.
show if he doesn't come back.
Yeah. Were you able to avoid Seattle for the winter freeze, or were you traveling?
What do you mean?
The last 3 weeks or something, we got freezing temperatures. It was terrible. I was like, I'm not leaving the house. It's like 22 degrees outside.
We got this in Nashville. So I'm in Nashville now. So like we were completely iced over, and like the power was out for people, like 375,000 people out of power. Like it was pretty wild.
Worse.
It was
Yeah.
temperatures down in the single digits. It was not a great time, man.
Yeah.
It was worse. Yeah. And then nobody can friggin' drive here. So of course Seattle's bad too. Like Seattle, anytime any type of snow happens, it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
Hey Stuart, welcome back, brother.
You're back.
The thing froze up. I don't know what happened. When did I lose you?
This is why
you were talking about the Broca's
best.
area being used for bioelectric detection. That's where you left off.
So I think the Broca's area sort of transitioned from curating bioelectric communication to linguistic communication. So people that have linguistic deficits are going to have a greater capacity to communicate bioelectrically. So that's kind of my view of it, So I don't think there's any sort of bullshit with that part of it. The bullshit I call is the anchoring consciousness at the quantum scale. That's where you and I are gonna tussle it out. And I'm not disagreeing with the microtubules are important for consciousness or the production of the biofield. I think we probably agree on that.
Well, that's like interesting, segue here. Like, are you sure that you understand Sterling's position on the function of microtubules and consciousness? Because it doesn't seem like there is a there's like it's like the interface between quantum and classical, right? That sort of happens periodically. That gives rise to consciousness in Sterling's view and in the Hammer-Off view. So it does. I think invoking quantum is kind of like unnecessary unless I'm getting something wrong. But I'll let Sterling respond to that one.
It's like right on. It's like it's a boundary condition thing that's between classical and quantum. Quantum relatively being a below, and then classical on top, and then consciousness is sort of something that happens in this field that's here, and it has something to do with the collapse of the wave function, if that is a real thing. And so it's this kind of like self-observation at the very Planck scale, let's say. Planck scale does not say quantum or classical, it's just a scale. But that's where that effect is happening. And consciousness could be happening, I mean, I think it is happening all over the place. It would have to be. For there to be physical objects, there has to be that objective reduction thing. But it's where you see places that are like a lot of benzene rings, a lot of these tryptophan residues, things where you see like, okay, a rock is not using its consciousness, but a living organism seems to be using some, like there's some function to me being experientially here. Because somebody on Twitter the other day was like, well, it's just cause and effect observation. It's just like the world is a cause and effect machine and we're just here observing it. And I'm like, then cause and effect would happen without me being here. Why the fuck do I have to be conscious for all of this shit? Just zap my consciousness out of the thing, make me a zombie, and then let the universe play itself out in a cause and effect machine. Why
Right.
the fuck do I have to be here through all the good and the bad and all this shit? Like, why is there consciousness? And so I guess one thing, going back to your point, is what if, we talk about people doing like meditation and trying to get the internal voice to go away, right? They're like, oh, I want to meditate and I want to live in a cave. But what if that process of like self thinking, like talking to yourself in your head, essentially at the very bare minimum of like what we think is I'm human now, is kind of like as deep as you can go in consciousness. Like, what is that? Like, we're touching like bare metal of like the raw material of being in the universe, is just having that ability to like observe. It's not like you have a lot of other complex weird shit going on and then like the cherry on top, like after billions of years of evolution, then a bipedal ape started to have consciousness. I don't think that's the case. I think there's probably consciousness from like the very get-go, and a paramecium single-celled organism with lots of microtubules is sort of having like a very, relative to its body size, probably a very similar process. Like, gosh, I'm hungry. I want to fuck. I want to attack that thing. I want to run away. There's something similar. It's not English, obviously, but it's probably some kind of a self-observational dialogue. Unless you can say like, oh no, we know for sure that like a chimpanzee doesn't have it, a dog doesn't have it, or a dog does have it, or a cat does, or like how far do you go back and what mechanism is that happening in? I think microtubules are like a really good candidate for it. So yeah, but that'd be my question to you, like, why couldn't consciousness and the ability to think or whatever just be like a more complex form of the same thing? It doesn't have to be we don't have to invoke something else like bioelectric stuff. I think that's absolutely real. Michael Levin stuff is amazing. A huge follower of his. I will point out that he wanted to see how important microtubules were to that. So they just injected a microtubule blocking chemical into the process, and the entire bioelectric field just stopped. All of his experiments just ceased. So I was like, he's like, well, I don't think we have to know about microtubules for this stuff to work. I'm like, I don't think you have to know how your car works to drive a car, but if you put like apple juice in your engine and it stops, that would probably give me an impression that your engine is probably pretty important. So don't go around saying we don't need to microtubules. It's just another thing. It's like kind of seems like an important part of this thing you're talking about, but it's so
I absolutely
I think
agree.
it's
I agree. Microtubules are central to the bioelectric field, produced by the mitochondria, curated by the microtubules. So I have no argument with that. I mean, and I watched your podcast with Brent, and I cut my teeth on The Emperor's New Mind. That's kind of how I got started in all this. Hammeroff and Penrose, and I spent 10 years studying this kind of thing. So I intimately familiar with his work and Penrose and everything. But I think, where you and I mean, are you familiar with the free energy principle at all?
Yeah. Yes. I like that one. Yeah.
Well, it for me, it's provided sort of a framework through which the rest of this stuff can be understood. And, what you're talking about, where everything has consciousness, I think that's certainly possible,
I wouldn't put it that
but I see
way
no
exactly.
benefit of making that assumption that everything is experiencing hedonic states like we do, pleasure on pleasure, feelings. I mean, certainly that's possible. I see no benefit of making that assumption. So I call everything outside biology cognition. Everything has cognition. It's in biology is just I
Well,
mean,
can we
biological.
make it? Sorry, can we just make a distinction between, like, let's just say we have a rock in the room, just like a straight piece of volcanic rock, and then we have like a human, like just a brain, a xenobot brain. They're definitely different. So is there, like, I think that the process of consciousness as the orchestrated, like the objective reduction Penrose style, like just how that there's not like one rock's branching into a trillion different multiverses is prevented by objective reduction, which is self-observational collapse, so that these things don't skew too far apart. That's happening in a rock, but when it happens in a brain, the brain evolutionarily figured out, oh, I can control the branching process to my advantage, and that is free energy available. So I think that there's a process that's available to rocks, but
Well, the
biology, the reason it's biology is because it figured that out.
the problem with Penrose and Hameroff, and from my view, is that they have no way to understand subjective states. There's nothing in physics that has anything to do with subjective states. It's all objective. It's all the causal graph of objective cause and effect. This causes that, mathematical. The free energy principle sets up a model where everything has a subjective state and an objective state that's bound to it by a Markov blanket. And that Markov blanket is a perceptual interface that feeds information from the outside to the inside. And on the inside of the subjective state is a model. And that model is of the outside. And that's how it makes inferences of what's going to happen next. And that's everything that exists. Everything that is a thing is separated from the environment by a Markov blanket of some kind, like a cell. That cell membrane, that's the Markov blanket. You have the internal subjective state that has a model of the environment, and it's receiving information across that Markov blanket as a perceptual interface. That basic architecture is ubiquitous to everything that exists. That's what it means to exist. You have a subjective state and an objective state, right? So what you're talking about, the difference between a rock and a human being, when perception is passed over the Markov blanket, it has to be tokenized. It has to be transformed into something else so it can be understood by the subjective state. So the rock, when it perceives heat, that subjective state is going to tokenize that perception of heat into something. Who knows what that something is? For biological organisms, we tokenize perception into valence hedonics, pleasure on pleasure. This feels good, approach avoidance. That is what consciousness is. It's just a category of cognition. But a rock has cognition. Saying a rock is conscious means the rock is tokenizing heat into hedonic valences like biology does, which I don't see any evidence of that. I don't see any benefit of making that assumption. Saying the rock has cognition is useful. It's explanatory, and you're not going too far. And you don't drive yourself insane thinking that the rock has feelings of some kind. You can see how that sort of can mess with your head.
I don't think rocks have feelings at all.
Well, if you say it has consciousness, that's what you mean, because that's what consciousness is. That's how consciousness is defined: subjective experience of feelings. It feels like something.
No.
So if you say a rock has consciousness, you're saying it has
that's not
feelings.
how I just define consciousness. Okay, well, I don't define
really
consciousness like
start
that.
with definitions then.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing.
That. How do you define
so
consciousness?
I try my best to strictly adhere to like an Orch-OR definition of consciousness, which is a process that happens at the Planck scale many times per second, where two possible branching states are collapsed into one state. And that continues to happen. That's why we have one objective reality, not a multiverse. And the process is somehow important for, I don't know why, right? I don't know why I'm not going to get in the question. Why are we all here? I don't know. It just seems to be how it is. And then when I say consciousness, it's the objective reduction process that would happen with a rock falling through free space.
So,
Just the
in,
fact
in,
that
in your
the rock doesn't
definition,
start branching into multiple things.
Consciousness doesn't involve any kind of subjective experience. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so okay, so the solution of kind of, are you getting at like the hard problem of consciousness question of like, how does a rock end up feeling something, or how does a brain feel something?
No, I'm
Like, how
trying to
does it
figure out
integrate
how you're
things?
it sounds like you're saying the same thing I'm saying. You're just using a different word. You're calling everything consciousness. And I'm saying biology
I
is
don't.
consciousness and everything else is cognition. So I think what you're calling consciousness, I'm just calling cognition. Right? Does that make sense?
I. But I don't think that all. I don't think that consciousness is. When I think of cognition, I think of like 1 + 1 = 2.
You're
That's a
thinking like
process of
computation. You're kind
utilizing.
of aligning with like
Yeah, like
computation, right?
yeah. I think computation is definitely a distinct thing. I think there's a way of, even just for a human to access, of being where you're not really like doing problem solving. You're just really in the experience of being, just like when people meditate, that kind of stuff. That's like, you didn't have to like process a bunch of numbers or anything like that. I don't think a rock is conscious. I think that, I guess, and this is kind of a thing that I've drafted. Stuart Hameroff doesn't seem to love it, which I think is, we disagree on some things. I would call it the Xenon test. And since I've talked about Xenon quite a bit, that's a perfect anesthetic. It's a noble gas primarily as we know it, but it's an anesthetic as well. If I gave you a big tank of xenon gas and you started inhaling it through a balloon or through a respirator, you would fall unconscious, completely unconscious. You wouldn't be dead. Your autonomic processes would still work. Your heart would still beat, so it's not killing you, but you would be unconscious of the whole process. Your consciousness would have ceased to be happening.
See,
Doesn't mean you're not
this is
there.
another problem I have with Hameroff is he often does this. He'll go in between the medical definition of consciousness, which is basically awake or asleep, and sort of the
But you were
ontological.
saying that shouldn't be allowed,
What
right?
shouldn't be allowed?
You were
What?
saying that the any medical definition of the word consciousness shouldn't be allowed into the conversation of consciousness.
You just have to.
Was
You
that
can't
you
use.
saying
You
that?
can't use the same word to mean two different things unless you're clarifying that. If you're talking about awake or asleep as like my patient is
Well, he does that.
unconscious, yeah, he does do that, and it
Yeah.
drives me crazy because they're not the same thing. We're not talking about the same thing. We're talking about the ontology of consciousness and is my patient awake or not? That's not the same thing. Where the word is
Well,
being
no, but
defined.
awake and unconscious are different things. Like
Yes.
if I'm asleep, it's a different state than being unconscious. And if I'm awake, it's there. So we understand the term consciousness. The thing is, you would have to accept that there's some physical mechanism underpinning what gives me consciousness. Whatever we're seeing is consciousness. And how, if you give a drug to someone and the only thing that seemingly changes is that their ability to observe themselves from inside is gone reversibly, and like in the snap of a finger you can make it go away, and as soon as that gas disperses out of their body, they come back as if time itself had frozen. It's just like, boom, close your eyes, open your eyes, and you're back. But 8 hours have passed. That's an interesting, I think a novel thing. And to say like, oh, these anesthesiologists, these fucking retards, how dare they contribute the word conscious, their form of consciousness, to this ontology thing. It like I think Stuart's trying, and I think with some results, is trying to pull back this like it's as funny as it says. I feel like Stuart is the least woo-woo person in the consciousness debate, because he's at least trying to bring something like, we know that you can take consciousness away from a person and give it back. And that is the same type of consciousness that you're talking about. It is the same type. Is
No, it's not.
there okay, what's an example of consciousness that you can give? Like if you're okay, somebody doing bioelectric medicine speaking, give me an example. Because I could just say, well, let's do it while the person's heavily anesthetized, and can they still do it? But that
What
doesn't
you're
count.
what you're talking about
I
is
don't
a
see how that
medical.
remains.
You're talking about a medical term, level of consciousness, LOC. That is a medical jargon. That is a different thing than what I'm talking about, sort of ontologically. What is consciousness? Not the
Mhm.
medical definition of being awake or asleep or unconscious or conscious. That's a completely different category of conversation, and the word does not have the same semantic content. You're using the same word, but you're swapping out the semantic content when you use it when you're talking about conscious and unconscious. When you're talking about biological consciousness, what is that? And how to define it and how to discuss it and how to describe it. I'm not talking about whether I'm awake or asleep. I'm talking about the phenomenon of subjective experience of biology, which is a very different conversation. That is what's my patient's level of consciousness, right? You understand the distinction I'm making there?
I mean, I get where you're coming from because I've heard it many times, but um, I think the concept of consensus amongst people is important because I think there's going to be a day sometime, hopefully in my lifetime, where there can be a mass of people who go, okay, we generally agree on some overall like understanding of consciousness. I
Right.
think it needs to happen.
Oh yeah.
And
That's
so
my
if you're
goal in life.
like yeah, but if we take an ontological thing, you know who I always hear talking about ontology and this kind of stuff? Religious people. There are people on the pulpit. They're telling me about the ontology of demonology. And yeah, I don't know if you looked around, but a lot of people don't agree at all on any ontology at all. And you can argue till you're every
well,
color
let's
in the
well let's
face
let's let's
on that,
define
but
on
it's just
let's
not going to
define
get any
ontology.
consensus.
How do you define that word? What does ontology mean to you? I'm not religious,
I'll
by
let
the way.
you define it.
I'm not a religious person.
I honestly, I typically don't put my front foot with an ontological argument on it. I try to avoid it, to be honest. So I'm not the strong person to be arguing for an ontological stance here, I don't think.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's kind of my whole gig, is trying to develop an ontology of consciousness, which is different than a philosophy, a metaphysics, or a medical definition. Ontology is basically your model of reality. It is your beliefs about reality. And ontology is not just something that human beings have. Every single thing that exists has a model of the environment. So it has an ontology, it has a set of beliefs about its perceptions of things. That is ontology. Ontology has to be built
So
from
a
the middle
rock
out.
has an ontology.
A rock has a model of the environment. It has beliefs about the environment. It doesn't have subjective experience, but according to the free energy principle, that subjective state is a model of the environment. That is the rock's ontology. Its beliefs about the environment and its ability to reduce free energy is what that model does. It makes inferences and then it reduces variational free energy based on those inferences. That is how everything that exists continues to exist. Like if you drop ice in a cup of warm water, it's going to become thermodynamically
Mhm.
equal, right? Why doesn't everything do that? Why isn't everything thermodynamically equal? Entropy is trying to make everything thermodynamically equal. Why isn't it? It's because of the free energy principle, the principle of least action, and everything has a Markov blanket that keeps the inside in what's called a non-equilibrium steady state with the environment. It doesn't become equal, it has a model of the environment, and it's inferring what's going to happen, and it reduces free energy to stay balanced. Everything that exists is doing that. That's what it means to exist. So yes, everything that exists has an ontology. It has a model. It has a set of beliefs about the environment that it exists in. And this model is that beliefs set up, right? So when I say ontology, that's all I'm saying. As a human being, You have a model of reality inside of you, things you believe, right? And tonight, while we're talking, hopefully, you're going to update some of those beliefs. You'll be belief updating. You'll update yourself a little bit. So tomorrow, your ontology will be a little different. It will be updated a little bit, maybe a little better. You'll make better predictions. And that's the
I hope so.
yeah, that's the purpose of the model is to update given new experiences so it doesn't become thermodynamically equal with the environment. It has to belief update, and that's how things evolve, through belief updating. Everything that evolves, hydrogen to helium to carbon, all of that is a process of belief updating. All right, that the periodic table is the story of baryonic matter updating. Every single time a element goes to the next stage, that is an update, right? And eventually you get assholes like me and you sitting here talking to each other, and it's just sort of an intuitive process that ends with people like me and you, right? So when I say ontology, what I mean is, how do I as a human being create a model of consciousness? How do I as a human being understand that? What is my beliefs about consciousness? How do I model that in a way that makes my predictions better? In a way that I predict what consciousness is more accurately, with greater fidelity, than what exists outside of me, right? So I'm not talking about if a patient's level of consciousness. That is completely different than what I'm talking about, if that makes sense, right?
Well, it could look if I found a guy on the street and he looked like totally out of it, like he doesn't have to be my patient for me to be like, is he unconscious or is he dead
Yeah,
or
you do
what?
an
Right. So
LOC. You say, "What's your name? Do you know the day of the week? What time is it?" You do his LOC. You do A and O times 4. I get it, dude. But that's different than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an ontology of consciousness, not a medical definition, right?
Yeah,
can a
real quick.
rock update its ontology? Okay. Anyway, sorry, Brett.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
I
I was
mean,
just gonna jump in because I'm a philosophy nerd, so I just want to
Let him
be
jump in.
clear. Like, I'm coming from a very standard definition of ontology, so I'm working from, like, it's a branch of metaphysics, right? It's really just it's a study of what reality is, what type of entities exist, right? Like what exists in reality. That's when I say ontology. That's what I'm working with. So I just want to put my definition on the table because I'm just like a standard, run of the mill philosopher.
well, the
Thank
old
you.
definition of ontology from philosophy and metaphysics was what is objectively true, what is objectively real. It doesn't matter who the observer is. What is objectively real? That is what ontology has always been defined as, right? But observer
Right,
theory,
which is why it gets brought up in religious conversations, because the question is like, do demons exist? Do gods exist?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if
Mm-hmm.
so? Which one exists? Is it panentheist? Is it deist? Is it thea? Like, that is the type of, those are the ontological questions that are typically discussed in those religious forums, right?
Mm-hmm.
right? And but my definition of ontology is updated based on observer theory, based on Wolfram physics, based on the fact that there is no such thing as objective reality because the reality is observer dependent. You can't say something is objectively true because it depends on the observer. How the observer models reality is that observer's ontology. So there's no such thing as objective reality unless you have something outside of the universe looking in. Everything inside the universe has a subjective ontology. For a human being, our ontology of consciousness should be shared. And that's kind of my goal, is to create a shared ontology of consciousness for, sort of like the meta scale of all human observers. We can all agree that's what consciousness is, right? Not just for me, Stuart, not just for you, Brent, but for everybody. So we can share an understanding of this thing. That's kind of my goal, you know?
So,
Mm-hmm.
Stuart, I have a question for you. Have you studied Mariology?
Mariology? Is that
Mariology.
the science of being married?
No, no, that is
I need
not a
that.
science. That is an art, sir. But no, Mariology is a study of wholes and parts, right? And so when I hear you talk, and the free energy people talk about Markov blankets, and I start to think about Mariology because it's a question of like what actually separates a whole of something, right? Like me as an individual, like, well, actually, I have more cells that are foreign, inside my body. They're not even human, than I do that are human. But I call this sort of boundary, this Markov blanket, if you will, that my skin suit, right? Like we call that me, right? But mereology, there's like mereological essentialism,
Oh,
mereological nihilism.
as in myriad, Mariology.
Yeah, Mariology. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, man. I mostly just read it online. But yeah, it's a question of like, is the universe all just like one thing, or is it like what constitutes a whole, or what constitutes a part? That sort of subset of philosophy is interesting in this conversation when I start talking to FEP people, because it seems like that's really applicable to and obviously you're talking about your scale invariant thing, and like what actually constitutes a Markov blanket. That's interesting to me, because Markov blankets seem to me to be kind of theoretical in some sense, like you kind of are arbitrary almost. Like you can kind of just, well, we're calling this the boundary. And I know at very small scales and in certain cases there's mathematical principles that are applied, right? But I think when you start zooming out at a larger scale, I think it becomes harder to define that Markov blanket. I could be kidding.
Well,
I'm not an expert, and that's why I'm asking you the question.
it might be hard for us to define where exactly the blanket state is, right? But for a cell, it's real obvious, right? A cell has an obvious Markov blanket. A human being has an obvious Markov blanket. I mean, you can say your skin, your epidermis, is a Markov blanket, but you could also say your bioelectric field is a Markov blanket that the human body is nested within. The extent of you is the extent of that bioelectric field, and you're nested within that, right? So, and that's kind of the architecture of all of this, is nested Markov blankets. So it's a bioelectric field is a Markov blanket. It's a perceptual interface, and you have your epidermis. That's a Markov blanket nested inside the biofield. And then you have your brain nested inside the skin. And then you have neurons nested inside the brain. And then you have mitochondria nested inside the neurons, right? So it's this nested hierarchy of Markov chains that goes down and down and down and up and up and up. I mean, around the Earth is a biofield. That's a Markov blanket. Around the solar system is the sun's EM field. That's a Markov blanket. Around the solar system is the Oort cloud. That's a Markov blanket. So you have this nested hierarchy of Markov blankets. So all of those are blanket states. All of those are perceptual interfaces to some degree or another. Understanding those blanket states is interesting and important, but the important thing for me is the understanding of that basic architecture. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about consciousness. We're talking about biological organisms that exist within a nested hierarchy of Markov blankets that extend out to the scale of the globe. And each individual human being is nested inside an individual Markov blanket, and we interact with each other, right, through these bioelectric fields and linguistically and touching and everything. But once you get beyond planet Earth, I lose interest, because there's no way for us to understand a Markov blanket beyond that. I mean, we can measure the existence of it. We can say, yeah, we think there's an Oort cloud. We can say, yeah, we think there's a galaxy, but we can't understand anything beyond that. So it's kind of like, who gives a shit? As far as ontology goes, as a human being, I don't give a shit. I'm never going to exist at the solar system scale or at the cosmic scale or at the galaxy scale. Why do I give a shit? So that's why my ontology is local. It's from the center out. My belief updating is from myself out. I don't give a shit about the cosmic scale, and I don't give a shit about the quantum scale. I don't exist at those scales. So my ontology is completely uninterested in that shit from a practical standpoint. Obviously, I'm interested in that, attractor states exist at the quantum scale. That's fascinating. That we can measure them and predict them is fascinating. But ontologically, it's almost like, who gives a shit? I'm never going to exist there. I'm never going to have anything to do with them. They don't affect my life in any way. If it wasn't for our modern technology, I'd never even know they existed. I don't interact with.
Yeah. Can I okay, so I get that, the Markov blanket concept and the the belief kind of ontology of a sphere and what's outside and then inside is subjective. I'm just curious though. Okay. Your goal here is kind of to get a general understanding of consciousness. There's a word, consciousness. I have a belief about what I think is consciousness. You have a belief about what you think is consciousness. Brent also has his belief about consciousness. when I go to, and again, I'm not really willing to take away the very, I think, well understood medical definition of consciousness from the discussion.
I don't think you should. I just think it's important we're having this conversation to realize we're not talking about the same thing. You're using that word in a different way. That semantic content of that word means something completely different when you say it.
When you say belief, though, when I think of belief, I think, okay, I have beliefs, you guys have beliefs. That makes sense. But then you're also saying that something with a boundary has beliefs, so a rock has beliefs.
Yeah,
I think you're using belief in a different word. I think you're using a different definition of belief.
Well, if you want to get to the technical reason we say belief, it's because the internal model is sort of the reason we use the word belief is because the information that you receive across the Markov blanket it's a sparse coupling. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So there's hidden causes of your perceptions. So everything that you perceive is basically a belief. It's not the actual thing. It's what you believe the thing to be. So the word belief is sort of carrying a lot of weight there, but that's why
I disagree with that. If somebody punches me in the face, there's no need for belief to enter into that. If somebody injects me with propofol, I don't have to have a belief about how anesthetics work for me to go unconscious. So there's not a world where I live where it's just all like, that's almost a more fanciful approach. It's all beliefs. That's something that you'd hear like Tony Robbins say, like
the thing that you're doing,
manifest your destiny, anything you want. I don't.
What you're doing is you're taking you're taking a technical definition and then raising it to the scale of human beings and saying bullshit. I'm not talking about a human being.
Which definition specifically?
The free energy principle definition of the internal model and the vernacular that's used under the FEP to describe that. It's called belief updating, or the beliefs of the internal model. The reason that word belief is used is because of this technical thing that, like, when you use your eyes, you're seeing a tiny, tiny bit of the electromagnetic field, right? Okay, you're not seeing everything. Okay, so what your brain transforms in your head is a belief. It's not the thing that you're looking at. It is a belief about the thing based on your Markov blanket and that perceptual sparse coupling between your eyes and your brain. Right? So it is not
right. Real quick, can I interject real quick, Stuart? I think one of the words that would be helpful here is the prediction. When you're talking about FEP, it's like this ability to make predictions, right? So to understand information is crossing that Markov blanket that allows whatever. I don't know how they would, like an electron, for example, or something at a small scale to make a prediction about all the information in the Markov blanket is sufficient for that thing to update the model and make predictions about it, right? Like that's the core of the FEP. And so I think maybe belief is not a good word because it sort of implies like higher level cognitive ability. And the FEP is like, especially at small scale, it's not like that. It's not, it doesn't translate cleanly.
It's not like a human belief. But like I said, the reason belief is used is because of that perceptual sparse coupling. The thing that you're perceiving is not the thing. It is your belief about the thing, right? It's not.
I think
the thing,
there could,
right?
like, just as like you're like, oh, you shouldn't have a medical like usage of the word consciousness when we're talking like ontology in consciousness. Like the philosophical version of consciousness is different than if a doctor anesthetizes a person and needs to know if they're conscious or not. I think there's more. I also think like putting like the only place where humans care about consciousness is like just in a doctor's office. Like that's not true. People are doing ketamine for experimentation to understand consciousness. People do drugs all the time for consciousness exploration. There's more interesting things in consciousness modulation with anesthetics than exists in just, oh, these weird nerdy doctors are doing it. So I think we should expand that. Like, it's not just doctors.
I'm
like,
not being
interested in it.
derogatory.
I do Xenon research.
Sterling, I'm
But
not being
there's a word for
derogatory
consciousness
about what
there.
you do.
I
I'm
think
not being
belief, though, the belief being used on the scale of like literally everything, I can't bridge that gap. There has to be a better word. Like when we talk about like neural nets, trying to find like the trough, like the local minima or the local maxima, like they're trying to find their free energy in that space. I get that, like, but I don't go like, oh, the model believes, and that, like, so I feel like there could probably be a better word. I would even push back more against
I am
like,
not
I think you need
responsible.
to redefine
I'm not
belief
responsible for
in
that
that
word.
sense.
Carl Friston is the one that uses that word, not me. Carl Friston is the one who developed the free energy principle.
Yeah.
And you're really not going to
Mhm.
like this part. He talks about things that the system doesn't anticipate as surprise. The system is surprised because it's something the system did not anticipate. So variational free energy is surprise. It's something the system didn't anticipate. So it has to update its beliefs. It has to update its internal model. It has to do what's called belief updating. What are you familiar with Bayesian generative models or Bayesian mechanics or anything like that?
Mhm.
So in a Bayesian generative model, you have a prior distribution and a posterior distribution. The posterior distribution is your beliefs. That is your model by which you make predictions over that statistical manifold, right? So your prior distribution is your belief system. And then you're making predictions based on those priors. And then you make observations. And based on those observations, you update your beliefs. You update your priors. So if you want to use priors
Okay,
instead of beliefs,
sure.
that's
Why can't I update my priors when I'm completely under anesthetics? Explain that to me. If I'm under propofol for 3 hours in the operating room, why do I not have any any experience of this at all? My beliefs don't exist seemingly.
right.
Explain that. How does
Well,
that mechanism work?
you, Sterling, have a
This would
primary
happen to
attractor
anybody.
state.
This is not just me.
Everybody.
Okay.
I'm just using you as an
Yeah.
example. You have a
Okay.
primary attractor state, which is your autobiographical self that exists in your PFC. But that is the consequence of a nested hierarchy of consciousness that's embodied within you. So when you lose consciousness, that means the synchronization between those Markov chains, those modules of consciousness, has been broken. Because the only reason you have a metacognitive self is because it is the end or the tip of a Markov chain. So what you're doing when you take propofol is you're interfering with that synchronization of that embodied hierarchy of the consciousness. So it sort of breaks the connection between the PFC and the synchronization required for you to have an autobiographical awareness of the world. But everything inside of you still goes on. You still have digestion, your heart's still beating, your liver is still producing enzymes. The hierarchy of consciousness still exists. It's only your autobiographical self in your PFC that loses the capacity to be aware. And that's just because you're interfering with that chain of consciousness, right? You're breaking that chain. So that's the way I understand it.
Well, so if you have like you could do brain surgery and cut parts of your brain and you can lose an autobiographical sense. People can forget that they can forget their name entirely, but they're also conscious.
Yes.
So how do you explain that?
You can
That's a
have
different situation.
you can have children with encephalitis that have no cortex at all, that still have emotional experiences, perceptual experiences, and that sort of demonstrates my point. Your self is a nested hierarchy of selves. It's not just you.
Well, they still
You
have a
sit at
cortex. Encephalitis, they still have a cortex.
no. When there's a
Yeah,
type of
it's a
encephalitis
very
where they have
thin
no,
layer, about an inch, where they have a cortex and there's a big ball of water in there. But the microtubules are still there. There's still
no,
microtubules
it's
in the brain.
basically just the brain stem, and then Mark Solms and Damasio did a
A
lot
little
of
bit.
research on this, right?
Hmm.
And and Jaak Panksepp is the one that he did a lot of Decorticate experiments with rats, where he would pluck the cortex out in utero and then test the rats who are decorticate, that don't have a cortex at all. And they still bred and they still had emotional experiences and they had deficits in intelligence. But you can remove the cortex and the rat will still behave like a rat, right? That is sort of demonstrates
They
the
still
point
have
I'm making.
microtubules.
Of course they do. Every cell in the body
They're
has
still
microtubules.
conscious.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So you can do anesthetics and remove someone's consciousness, whatever you want to describe. If there's let's just say we
Awareness,
could
maybe?
even we could just get rid of the word consciousness here. You can do anesthetics and stop both things that we're talking about. There doesn't even need to be a word. It doesn't need to be Markov blankets or beliefs or consciousness or anything like that. But I can tell you that that thing, whatever it is, that
You can use the
anesthetics
word as long as I know
deeply
what you mean.
touches it. No, I don't need to use the word. Anesthetics specifically touch that exact thing that you and I are both talking about.
Yeah.
We can agree on that.
Yeah.
So anesthetics is an important component of understanding what that is. And that doesn't require ontology. That requires chemistry. That requires physical material, because
Sure.
you have to get anesthetic somehow, right? So that's also physics. That's a domain of what exists objectively, right? Like I can't just hand you an empty bottle that doesn't have xenon in it and get you the same effect, no matter how much you believe in it or whatever you want to call it. It has to
Brent,
actually have
do
the
you
xenon in
see any
there for
way
you
to
to become
bridge the gap
unconscious.
between me and you? Because I think we're sort of talking past each other. Can you bridge this gap?
I'm not sure I can. Like that's where I was trying to offer the word awareness, right? Because it seems like there's
awareness.
it's
I like that word
particularly I've
too.
talked to Sterling a lot about this, and there seems to be this belief that seems well founded that there's something called proto-consciousness, right? So you can and somehow it's like a higher grained resolution as you bring more bundles of microtubules together, have the pyramidal neurons and cortical matter, like as you go up the chain, like you get a higher resolution version of consciousness, and there's got to be some of that proto-consciousness still happening in the body when you're under anesthesia. So like I'm thinking the word that comes to my mind is like awareness, because you're not aware, you're not thinking, you're not feeling. You can stab your arm literally and you're not going to move, you're not going to feel it. It's just like your awareness is gone during that time. But obviously we all agree that processes still run, and there's got to be some level of consciousness operating below the sort of awareness level. And I'm just not smart enough to sort of figure out how all that stuff works, but it certainly seems suspicious that you can take a inert gas, right? It completely doesn't even interact with the body like xenon, and then completely remove your awareness. Like that's something important, I think.
It's fascinating.
And the research that I funded down at Stanford to help fund with my own money sent them xenon, and the other anesthetic that they're looking at is isoflurane or something. It's some, I didn't ever want to touch it because he showed me what microtubules do under high dose, because it's anesthetics. People, it's like weird. They like treat it like, well, I had anesthetics once and I woke up, or like I was sort of conscious. I'm like, the dose is the amount of what you're talking about. Even when we're saying like, oh, I can do anesthetics and your heart still beats, you can actually pump someone through with enough anesthetics that their heart will also stop. It's a well-catered
Sterling,
science.
let me ask you something.
But but let me say, the anesthetics would burst the microtubules, literally at the high enough doses, and we're talking like 2.5% oxygen concentration of this one highly potent anesthetic would cause the microtubules first to just stop anything. But then just a little bit higher, they would just break apart into a soup and an ooze and never recover. So it's kind of important, whatever's happening there. So you like all awareness is gone. That person is, for all practical purposes, dead. Also, like completely gone, like
absolutely
not coming back. So I think those are important things.
Are you interested?
I don't know.
Are you interested in consciousness beyond medicine? I mean, the way I talk about it, you don't seem to have any
I'm conscious
interest
all the time for the most part.
No, I'm asking if you have interest. If you have interest, if you have interest in the kind of consciousness I'm talking about. You seem to have an interest in medical.
I'm trying to understand it better, though. I'm trying to understand it better, because when you're saying that it's what you could just say beliefs, but then you use beliefs in ways that I'm not familiar with. Like I don't think of a rock and go, oh yeah, what does the rock believe? That sounds just as insane as you saying that I say that rocks are conscious and have feelings. They're both insane. I can take a meta perspective on both, both red herrings or just, straw menning each other and be like, these are both completely absurd ways to pose what we're saying. So I get that, but yeah, I don't think rocks believe, and I don't think rocks have feelings. So
I don't either.
but you believe that rocks do have beliefs because you've said that.
I think
Well, I think this is where we go back to
Friston.
Like, we're going to get hung up on Friston, twisted around the axle, and some of the words he uses, like surprise, right? Like, it's a really weird thing. And I don't know. And it sucks because I think we do need to define terms. We have to at least agree to definitions. And I'm not sure we've gotten there yet. I feel like I understand Stuart more because I spent a lot of time diving into more of the FEP stuff and watching, Friston actually explain stuff and do seminars. It's like, I feel like I've got a little bit better understanding of what Stuart is talking about now. And it's just weird because it's a colloquial term that we apply in a certain way, but Stuart means it in a very different technical way, just like with the surprise thing and updating internal models. And like,
well,
that's
I've talked about technical research. I've talked about research, like putting things into other things. You guys are talking about ontology. Like, I could write that in a book. I could have an AI write that 1 billion times. What are some examples? Like, show me. You talked about Levin. What's a study that Levin did that you're like, this to me proved what consciousness is? Okay. What do you have?
So
show me what you've got.
I can address that. It's actually really cool. When Carl Friston first developed the free energy principle, the reason what happened was he was studying fMRIs, and he noticed that the input-output ratio of neurons looked like a Bayesian ratio. So he started developing a sort of tinkering with Bayesian mechanics to try to figure out if he could figure out what the hell it was doing. And this developed into what was called the free energy principle, right? And over 5-10 years, they started a computer model, the free energy principle, to see if they could recreate biology based upon this basic idea. And they could. They could create the architecture of cells, the synchronization of cellular populations, the hierarchy of cells in organisms, all with just computer models. By using the free energy principle and messing with the variables, they were able to reproduce biology. Okay. So what Michael Levin did, and Michael Levin's
a computer, though.
Right. But what Michael Levin did, he's a huge fan of the free energy principle, is he went in and he was looking for what's called a nested hierarchy, a modular nested hierarchy, because that's what the free energy principle creates, is a modular nested hierarchy, right? And so he started treating the human body as a modular nested hierarchy. And in the free energy principle, the prediction it makes is that information traveling up the nested hierarchy is going to be fine-grained. It's going to become more detailed as it travels bottom up. As it travels top down, it becomes more coarse-grained, right? So like the information that your brain sends to your stomach becomes more coarse-grained as it reaches the stomach. And as it goes up, it becomes more fine-grained until we have our cortex, and it becomes very acute, right? It's much more detailed. So you have fine graining traveling up and coarse graining traveling down. Michael Levin discovered that's exactly what happens in biology. Information traveling through modules and organisms is coarse grain traveling down and fine grain traveling up. And the fascinating thing that he found is he found a way to change that coarse graining. And if you mess with it even a little bit, it destroys the competency of that organism. So that fine graining and coarse graining is very specifically set within organisms. And if you mess with it at all, it destroys the competency and the thing dies. That is something predicted by the free energy principle.
Have you ever heard of the vagus nerve? Because you're talking about the gut brain. I know a lot about the vagus nerve.
The enteric nervous system, right, yeah.
No, the vagus nerve specifically. Do you know how many branches go up and how many go down?
I don't know what the ratio is? As you, obviously. I don't know that much about it anatomically.
So what you're saying, that doesn't apply here, because what you're saying is that there's essentially inferring as a 1-to-1 connection, that the brain has 1 up, 1 down times a million up, a million down. And that when the information goes up, it's more fine-grained, and when it goes down, it's coarse. But that's not what is there at all. There's a architectural component to how much information is in the gut going into the brain, and there's less going down to the body.
How are
But
you
that's
measuring
structurally
information?
controlled by microtubules.
How are you measuring information?
Well, so there's about 80% of the signals that travel on the vagus nerve go up, 20% go down. So information would be, are you hungry? Are you sick? Are you going to vomit? These kinds of things. And then the control of the gag response, like you can induce yourself to kind of vomit, these kinds of things. Those are sent down. So there's a lot of signals that go up and down. This is an area I know quite well, the vagus nerve, but again, this is like, you could call it coarse or fine, but like,
We're talking
talk
about
to
two
people
different
who
things,
work with the vagus nerve.
That's not what
You
I'm
literally
talking
just
about.
said information between the gut and the brain, and you're like,
That's not what I'm talking about.
so this vagus nerve guy's, but I'm talking ontologically. Like,
No, I'm
like
talking
again,
about
like,
Michael
who
Levin's
could have
work.
a conversation at
I'm not
this level? Michael Levin does not research the vagus nerve. What you're saying that, he found that too. He does not work on the system at all. I know his work very well.
I didn't say anything about the
he
vagus
works on
nerve.
planarian worms. You talked about the gut-brain connection.
Okay, think about
the
it this
vagus nerve
way.
is
Okay,
very much involved in that process.
think about it this way.
Sorry.
When you have a synchronized population of cells, the scale of the synchronized cellular population is different than the individual cell, right? As far as how much information it can process, right? So, like the brain as a whole has a greater capacity than the individual neuron, right? If you tried to process all of the neural activity in one neuron, it would destroy the competency of that neuron. So the information at the scale of the synchronized cellular population is going to be finer grained. Is when it goes down to the level of the individual cell, it has to coarse grain that information. So it is within the competency of the individual cell to understand it. I'm not talking about the vagus nerve. I didn't say anything about the vagus nerve. I'm talking about a general principle.
You are actually talking about the vagus nerve. That's when
I
you're talking
didn't
about
say-
gut brain.
I didn't
it's
say
the
anything
vagus
about
nerve.
the vagus nerve.
Well, that's
I didn't say anything about that.
I think a weakness. You don't. You're taught. You're like, oh, they modeled the body. Okay, look. If I take a computer simulation of eating a sandwich and I have digestion, would I be like, look, guys, I have this CPU. My computer is eating a sandwich. It's literally digesting a sandwich. You would never say that. You said, I wrote a simulation of ones and zeros on a computer. And
this wasn't simulated.
has
This is
words
Michael
that say
Levin's
digestion
work.
happened.
This wasn't in a simulation.
No,
this was done in
Carl
actual organisms.
Did computational
Are you
simulations.
intentionally misunderstanding
That's
me?
different.
I'm saying
Carl
things and you're not
Friston
responding
is not
to what
Michael
I'm
Levin.
saying. Hey, I'm
They're
saying
two
things and
different
you're not.
people.
Are
You can't
are you
just say that
intentionally
they validate
misunderstanding
each
me?
other.
No,
I
I'm
think
saying
I'm doing
things,
a pretty good
and then
job
you're
of understanding you.
All right, this ain't gonna work for me, Brent. I'm saying things,
Well,
and he's acting like I said something else, and then
okay.
when I try to talk, he interrupts me.
They're two different people. Sorry. And
well,
I know who
hold
they
on
are.
a second. Let's back
You
up
are
a little bit, because
making no effort to understand what I'm saying. And when I try to explain it to you, you intentionally misunderstand me like a freaking child. If you don't want to understand it, go talk to somebody else. If you want to understand
I
something,
can say the same to
you
you.
have to make an attempt to understand what I'm saying. Not misinterpret what I'm saying and then say I'm wrong and declare victory. That's not what I said
I never
at
declared
all.
victory.
Yes, you are. You're saying, oh, it doesn't work because it's computer model. Michael Levin is not working
You
with
said
computer
they
models.
simulated it. You said they
He did not.
simulated the system.
You see what I'm saying?
Carl Friston. You were
Michael
talking
Levin
about
is the
Carl
one I'm talking
Friston.
about. I'm talking about Michael
You
Levin.
started talking about
Hey, time out.
Friston
Stuart, help me out a little bit, because I'm not familiar with this. So can you explain to me what Michael Levin's work is in this area? Because I don't know anything about it. So talk to me like I'm 3.
I can send you the paper. Brent, I can send you the paper. It was fascinating, and I've talked to Michael about this. It's absolutely earth-shattering that he's figured out how to do this. What he has discovered is the general principle, the free energy principle predicted about coarse graining top down and fine graining bottom up, is exactly what he has found in biological systems, not in simulations, in biological systems.
Which systems did he study? Like, what are we studying here? Because what are the subjects?
Well, the planaria is what he was using, I think, when he did the top down bottom up. He was he learned how to change the coarse graining on information traveling down through the planaria, and it destroyed the competency of all the modules below when he changed the coarse fine graining variant. This was done in organisms, not in simulations, done in organisms. And this isn't my work. This isn't Carl Friston. This isn't a simulation. This is something Michael did with organisms.
Right, and this is, and I'm not super familiar with Michael's work, so apologize for being ignorant here. But Levin is like a devotee of Friston, right? Like, or at least is derivative of the, basically starts with the FEP and tries to apply it in other areas, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people that are working with Michael take the FEP as sort of like a hyperprior. It's something that defines sort of what it means to exist. This sort of general free energy principle with the principle of least action is what they're all proceeding from. And that's how he's been able to make such amazing discoveries, is by he's making the free energy principle makes predictions. And based on those predictions, Michael's saying, okay, well, if that's true, we can test that. And he's found that that coarse graining, fine graining thing the FEP predicted is absolutely what we find in biology, which is just another validation for the free energy principle.
Well, I have no problem with any of that. I like Michael Levin. I'm not arguing against his work with planarian worms. Carl Friston's work is computational in nature when it started. So his, like, oh, he simulated all this on a computer. That's how he did it to start. Michael Levin is a separate guy who researches on planarian worms, and he does really interesting stuff. But what still applies, and I think what must be brought back, is when he started saying, oh, we don't have to know anything about microtubules at all for any of this stuff to happen. That's totally fair. Just like I don't have to know how a car engine works to drive a car. But he did test microtubule blockers in his experiments, in those same experiments that you're talking about. Guess what? They grinded to a halt. They don't work. They don't happen. So I still believe microtubules are extremely important in the conversation. And I also believe that there are a couple of interesting things that happen when microtubules are prevented from doing what they're supposed to do, which is, one, I can't say if a planarian worm gains or loses consciousness when you give it anesthetics, because I'm not in a planarian worm's brain. But when I do it, I do lose consciousness. Something happens. But my brain doesn't go to mush, and it reverses. And none of my priors are being updated. It's just I'm out and then I'm back. And I think that's a very interesting thing. And I think, look, if, we're trying to understand consciousness, would you say someone who's like a Danny Goler who does DMT research, and like there's lots of guys who do DMT research, would you be like, guys, I love your work, but you can't have a single opinion on this because that's a physical thing and you're manipulating your mind? That doesn't have to do with these ontology concerns. I think that what Danny has done to contribute to the field is really important, and I've studied his work too. So yeah, I think that there is a difference between the physics. Like there's physics, right? Like all of the experiments that Levin did were also under the control of gravity, right? I'm not arguing with gravity. I think that's cool. I think that's real. I think there's lots of processes that are happening. But I maybe you aren't actually talking about consciousness here. You're talking about really interesting experiments, which are awesome and should happen, and I support that. But it doesn't really sound like you're actually talking about consciousness experiments as most people would understand them, because you haven't really addressed consciousness as far as like as a specific thing. You've brought up rules, but again, maybe again that's what the attempt of Orch-OR is to do, is actually hammer down like there is a distinct sliver of physics where there's a thing that's distinctly consciousness, and it should be carved out to be that. But like fractals existing in nature and Fibonacci sequences, you could tell me about that all day. We could yell at each other about the Fibonacci sequence in plants. It would not address the question of consciousness, I don't believe. Like, we would not get any further in understanding what consciousness is if we argued about the Fibonacci sequence in mathematics.
The thing that
And
rises
so,
my
yeah.
ass, Sterling, is when I say something and then you repeat it back, and that's not what I said, and I try to explain what I mean, and you won't let me speak, and then I explain it, and then you continue to say I said something I didn't say. That's what rises my ass. I can't have a conversation with somebody who does that. If you have no intention of trying to understand what I'm trying to say, I don't see any point of having a conversation.
I am still here, so I am trying to understand
what I
it.
call a good faith conversation. I understand your position. I understand Hammeroff. I understand Penrose. I understand where you're coming from. You don't understand where I'm coming from. And when I try to explain it to you, you mock it. You say you don't know what consciousness is, and you're very derogatory.
So you can read minds. Not a good faith you know what I know.
I know
Stuart, you know what I know. And,
I've listened to your podcast. I know what Orch-OR is. I've studied this for years. I've read the books. I'm familiar with your model.
You know the full content of my entire mind, Stuart. Who's the one talking woo-woo?
Okay.
I know everything you gentlemen
now. Brent, you have a good evening.
Well, hey, at least let me wrap it up. Let's just wrap it up.
Yeah, let him wrap it up.
I'm really sorry that everybody went off the rails here. I feel like in retrospect, I'm going to be able to do like a retroactive view of this and trying to get to the core of the disagreement here of talking past each other. But hey, like, thanks for showing up anyway. Thanks for having the conversation. I've actually learned a lot. I also feel like a little bit lost as far as why we're talking past each other, and I'm going to try to get to the bottom of it, because I love you both, man. I think this is great. I think it's a super interesting area of study. I'm glad you guys showed up and hashed it out, and this is the most disagreeable podcast I've had so far, episode 120. So yeah, I got
accomplished.
Some good clips from this anyway. We can have some fucking throwdown. So anyway, guys, seriously, I really do appreciate you. I respect both y'all, and thanks for showing up today, and we'll chat later.
Love you, brother.
Cheers. See you guys.
Yep.
Later.
Bye.